echo calls to seize this opportunity and to make a real difference for the victims of modern slavery. Thank you.
Carolyn Harris.
Thank you, Mrs Main. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and may I too congratulate the Honourable Member for Birkenhead for securing this important debate, and to all speakers today who spoke so eloquently. I welcome the independent review of the Modern Slavery Act and its robust and detailed recommendations, and I congratulate all those involved in producing this report. Modern slavery is an abhorrent, vile, devastating practice, and we must do everything in our power to ensure it is stopped, and those that fall victim to it are fully supported on their journey out of modern slavery and are given the dignified care that is needed. During my time as an MP and a Shadow Minister, I have spent many hours meeting and hearing the tragic stories of victims of modern slavery, stories of how they have been stripped of their rights, violated, subjected to abuse and inhumane work and living conditions. The review highlighted the significant scale of modern slavery that we have in the UK. In 2017, there were 5,143 potential victims referred to the NRM, of whom 41% were children. The number of actual victims who sadly go unreported will obviously be much higher. The review, along with CORE, the UK Civil Society Coalition on Corporate Accountability, have highlighted the weaknesses in the introduction of Section 54 of the Modern Slavery Act, Transparency in Supply Chains. An estimated 40% of eligible companies are not complying with legislation at all, and there is currently no penalties for non-compliance. When statements are being shared, they are often generalised and do not provide the detail required to be sure that modern slavery is not taking place. Consequently, if companies do have victims of modern slavery in their supply chains, very little has been done by an organisation to eliminate it. Much more needs to be done to strengthen this legislation, firstly by mandating that companies actually report on the 6 areas that the Act requests and ensure that there is a consequence if companies do not report. A commitment from companies could also provide the opportunity for a coordinated approach to issues which arise in multiple supply chains. If the UK wants to be seen as leading the way on this issue, then it must ensure that the structures are in place and enforced for companies to report on their supply chains. A further problem that I have raised a number of times, which has been identified in the review, is the lack of information on victims once they leave the NRM. The fact that this is not properly recorded leaves hugely vulnerable individuals at risk of being re-trafficked, without there being any knowledge kept of their whereabouts, and this is simply just not good enough. I would also like to speak specifically on the gendered nature of modern slavery. I understand that the law relating to prostitution could not be addressed in the review as it fell outside of its remit. However, I am pleased that the review, they intend to work with colleagues in the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Prostitution and Global Sex Trade, which my honourable friend from Rotherham has done such brilliant work on. Although this was not addressed in the review, it did highlight that many who gave evidence shared that England, Wales and Scotland not having a sex buyer law like other countries in Europe means that these countries could be more of a target for traffickers. The sex buyer law on prostitution decriminalises all those who are being prostituted. And during my time as an MP, I have met countless women who were involved in prostitution, and I have heard such harrowing stories of exploitative relationships and the dangerous situations that they are put in. Therefore, we must ensure that England, Wales and Scotland are not areas which are easy target for traffickers, because it does not have a sex buyer law. Now, the UK government can give us warm words and they can repeat the same lines on what they are doing to help victims and protect them from modern slavery or from being re-trafficked. But unless there is proper resourcing of our police force and our support services to undertake this mammoth task, then the desperately needed changes are not going to come about. I certainly will.
She was very clearly going through the issues around the law on prostitution here in the UK and setting out the very clear case for why a sex buyers law has helped reduce sexual exploitation in other very nearby countries, leaving the UK quite different in its laws. Will the Labour front bench be supporting a change in the law in this area?
I thank you for that question, and I will answer it quite simply and say a work in progress. There are 17,000 fewer police officers in 2015 than there were in 2010 in England and Wales. And this, regardless of the way you spin it, will have an impact on getting victims of modern slavery help. We can get closer to eradicating this heinous crime if there is properly resourced, coordinated approach by companies, politicians and other supporting bodies in committing to meeting the expectations of the Modern Slavery Act. There is a huge opportunity here to really be the world leaders on removing this horror from our society, but there has to be more enforcement and it has to be properly resourced. The consensus we have heard today should, and I hope will, motivate the government to implement these recommendations as soon as possible. And again, I truly thank everybody who has been involved in this remarkable and insightful piece of work. Thank you, Mrs May.
Minister.